Hello, fifth grade math students. Well, it's been a while since I've gotten to teach you in person. So we're gonna have to go with the next best thing, which is video and Zoom. So for math, I hope you have been practicing your multiplication tables and doing some app work or website work to practice your skills. And the ones that gave me their projects, you guys did an awesome job on it, and I hope that you use it to actually learn about geometry, because that's actually going to be instead of us using our book for geometry, just because I want to get in the most important things before the end of the year. And since you did that project, you were able to learn a lot about geometry, and if you keep studying it, you'll learn even more. All right, so before we left to stay home, we were talking about fractions. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a refresher in fractions, and then we're going to move on to equivalent fractions. So the parts of a fraction. The top part of a fraction is called a numerator. Bottom part of a fraction is called the denominator. The numerator is the part, the denominator is the whole. What does that mean? A fraction is the part of one whole, okay? So I have one whole circle, pi over here, and it's divided into three parts. And I made shapes inside of 2 out of 3 of those parts. So 3 parts make up one whole, and 2/3 of them are filled in. So 2 out of 3. Remember, that line right there is actually a division line, but when you say a fraction, you can either say 2/3 or you can say 2 out of 3, okay? So we also talked about how the numerator is supposed to be smaller than the denominator because the numerator is part of the whole. So if you see a fraction that has a larger piece or a larger number on the top and a smaller number on the bottom, that is called an improper fraction, okay? Improper fraction. And a mixed number, remember that was probably our last lesson before we left. We were doing mixed numbers on a number line. So a mixed number has a whole number and then a part of a number or a fraction of a number. So now that we've reviewed what fractions are, we're going to talk about equivalent fractions today, okay? Equivalent fractions are going to be very important in our upcoming lessons because when you add or subtract fractions, the denominator has to be the same in both of the fractions in order to add or subtract them. So we have to figure out what equivalent fractions are, and then we're going to talk about greatest common factors so that we can make fractions equivalent or make fractions the same so that we can add them or subtract them from each other. So what is an equivalent fraction? Well, equivalent is a very long word that means equal, okay? So an equivalent fraction are 2 fractions or 3 fractions that all are the same amount, okay? So I'm gonna give you a second to turn in your book to page 410, okay? 410 in your book, and it says Understanding Equivalent Fractions on the top. Or you could just pause this. All right, so if you are on page 410, you'll see on the top that there is a colorful model showing you equivalent fractions. Okay, I drew a very small version of that on the board. Wrong side. Sorry. Okay, so I have a box up here that shows you equivalent fractions. On the top, I put one whole, so you can see that this whole line is one whole. Okay, on the next line, this 1 whole is divided into 2 halves. Okay, 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1 whole. Now, if you look here, if you divide it into 4 pieces, you have 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 equals 1 whole. Now look at this right here. You have 1/2 and 1/4 and 1/4, so 2/4 equals 1/2. Now right down here, I have 8 pieces. So 1/8 plus 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 1/8 equals 1 whole. 8/8 equal 1 whole. But look at this, 1/2 also equals 2/4 also equals 4/8. Okay, so 1/2, 2/4, 4/8 are all the same amount. So they are equivalent fractions. Okay, so look, 1/2 equals 2/4 equals 4/8. And you can keep going on and on. So 1/2 also equals 24/48. So let's look down at example A and example B. So example A says, name the shaded part of the rectangle in 3 different ways. Okay, so it's the same size rectangle. It's just, it's divided into different amounts. Okay, so on the first rectangle, you have 4 pieces and 1 of them is shaded. So that fraction would be 1/4. Okay, that same exact amount in the next one is divided into 8 pieces and 2 out of the 8 pieces are shaded in. If you look at them next to each other, it's the same amount that's shaded in. So 1/4 is equivalent to 2/8. And then if you look at the next one, it's divided into 16 pieces and 4 out of the 16 pieces are shaded in. It's the same exact amount. So 1/4 equals 2/8, which equals 4/16, or 1/4 equals 4/16. Okay, look at example B. And example B says, name the red part of the set in different ways. Okay, so on the first one, you have 12 X's, and 4 of the X's are red. Okay, so you have 4 out of 12 X's that are red. Well, in the second one, there's still 12 X's, but they're divided into groups of 2. Okay, see, they're divided into groups of 2, and 2 of the groups are circled. So 2 out of the 6 groups are circled. So 4 out of 12 and 2 out of 6 are equivalent. Okay, look, it's going from larger to smaller now. And then the last one, there's 3 groups of 4, and you have 1 of the groups is red, and so you have 1 out of 3 of the groups that are red. Okay, so 4/12 equals 2/6, which equals 1/3. Okay, so you can say the same amount in different ways. Okay, so now that we know what an equivalent fraction is, we need to figure out how to find equivalent fractions. Like I said, you're going to need this later on when you're adding and subtracting fractions. So turn to page 412 in your book. The top says, how do you find equivalent fractions? Okay, so in your book, it shows this fun circle. So the first example starts with 3/8 and it equals 6/16. Now, the example says 2 people measured the length of a barracuda tooth. One wrote 3/8 of an inch and the other wrote 6/16 of an inch. Both were correct. So if 3/8 equals 6/16, what do we have to do to 3/8 in order to get 6/16. Okay, so in order to make an equivalent fraction, this is the rule all the time. In order to make an equivalent fraction, you have to multiply the top, the numerator, and the denominator, the bottom, by the same number, okay? You have to do the same thing to the top as you do to the bottom. You could also divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number, okay? If you're going from a larger equivalent fraction, larger numbers on top and bottom, to a smaller equivalent fraction, okay? So in the first one, it says 3/8 is turning into 6/16. Well, if you notice, 3 times 2 is 6, okay? So the top numerators, they're multiplied, the top one to number 2 is multiplied, number 3 is multiplied by 2 to get 6, okay? So the same exact thing is done to the bottom. 8 times 2 equals 16, okay? If you multiply the numerator and the denominator by different numbers, it's not going to be equivalent. So you have to multiply it by the same thing on the top and the bottom in order for it to stay equivalent, okay? Or divide the top and the bottom by the same number. Okay, so let's look at 1/2. So in order to make it 2/4, we're gonna multiply the top by 2 and the bottom by 2. So 1 times 2 equals 2, 2 times 2 equals 4. Okay, so 1/2 equals 2/4. Now, all the way over here, I got 24 over 48. Okay, so 1/2 equals 24 over 48 because I did the same thing to the top as I did to the bottom. So 1 times 24 equals 24, 2 times 24 equals 48. 1/2 could equal 300 over 600. 1/2 could equal 222 over 444. 1/2 could equal 1,250 over 2,500. That was rough. Okay, so you just have to do the same thing to the top as you do to the bottom, okay, in order to make it equivalent, equal, okay? So let's try a few and see if we get it. All right, let's look at check on page 413 for homework. This is going to be homework for Wednesday. You're going to be doing practice, which is skills and understanding, reasoning and problem solving, mixed review and test prep, but you're going to do odd, okay? So we're going to do a few of the check together. So number 1, it says, name 2 equivalent fractions for each fraction. So if I have 5/6 for number 1, now your answers could be different than my answers because all you have to do is make sure that you multiply the top and the bottom by the same number, okay? So you can pick any number, okay? Most common would be 2, 3, 5, but just for the sake of telling you what an equivalent fraction is, you can have to multiply the top and the bottom or divide the top and the bottom by the same number, okay? So 5/6 could be 10/12. What did I multiply it by? That's right. Okay, or it could be 15/18. What did I multiply it by? That's right. Okay, number 2, 1/10. It could be 2/20. It could be 4/40. It could be 7/70. Just have to multiply the top and the bottom by the same number. Okay, number 6, it says find the missing number to make the fractions equivalent. Okay, so only one number is missing. So what I have to do is figure out what I did or what they did to the number that is not missing in order to get it so that I do the same thing to the other number. Okay, so if number 1 says 3/7 equals blank over 28. Okay, so I know the bottom because it's there. So 7 times what equals 28? Gotta know your multiplication tables. Hope you're working on them. Yes, 4. 7 times 4 equals 28, so I have to do the same thing to the top. 3 times 4 equals 12. That's right. So 3/7 equals 12 28ths. All right, number 7. 8 24ths equals 1 over what? Okay, so 8 divided by what equals 1? 8. Yes, so I have to do the same thing to the bottom. 24 divided by 8 equals? Yes, so 8 24ths equals 1/3. Okay? Number 8. 6 over 21 equals blank over 7. Okay, so I know the denominator. So 21 divided by what equals 7? 3 again. Okay, so I have to do the same thing to the top. 6 divided by 3 equals? Okay, so 6 over 21 equals 2/7. Okay, get it? I hope so. All right, so we'll be able to talk about this a little bit more when we get on the live, but I just want to make sure that you know that when I assign your homework, we don't have worksheets, we don't have our workbook like we did at school, but thankfully we do have the problems in the book. So what I want you to do is either do it in a notebook if you have a notebook lying around. And I still want you to label the top. Make sure you put your name, because when I'm getting all of these pictures and stuff like that, it's good to have your name and the date and also the assignment. Okay, so I'm going to be sending the assignment with this email with the YouTube video. Okay, you can either do it in a notebook or you can do it on lined paper on a clipboard, as long as they stay on the clipboard. Okay, I need you to save these because when we get back together on Zoom, we are going to go over your homework so that we make sure that you understand it. Okay, or you could do lined paper in a binder. The biggest thing I just want you to do is make sure that it is lined, that you label them, and that you save them, because we need to keep them safely together. All right, so if you're watching this ahead of time, I'll see you at our Zoom time. If you're watching it right at the beginning of Zoom, I'll see you in a few minutes. All right, bye.